Hello, I'm Paul Innes, Professor of Shakespeare Studies. Welcome to my channel, Shakespeare for All. Today we'll be talking about Romeo and Juliet. This is one of 3 videos on the play that deal with character, plot and context. In this episode, we'll be talking about the characters. At the end of these videos, you'll find some useful study tips together with a list of keywords. I've been using the online version of the text from MIT, together with a more modern act and scene organisation from the Arden 3rd edition. If you're studying for assessments, any edition with supporting material like a good introduction and notes is fine. If you want to know more, please remember to subscribe. Now what we're going to do is start with a general plot overview. This play is relatively complicated because you have 2 main characters and they move in different worlds. Romeo is always on the outside, doing things, running around town, having fun, falling in love, getting into scrapes with his mates, and Juliet is almost always seen within the household. 2 of them are differentiated by gender, by behaviour. So it's a rather complex play. It doesn't follow the fortunes of just a single character, unlike, say, Hamlet or Macbeth. We have protagonists from different noble households. Romeo of House Montague and Juliet of House Capulet, set in the Italian city of Verona. Now the play begins with a riot between the attendants of these 2 families, which is then stopped by the arrival of the ruler of Verona, Prince Aeschylus. He vows to sentence to death any perpetrators of further violence between the feuding families. So these families hate each other's guts. The Montague youths find out pretty much by chance there's going to be a feast at the house of the Capulet family, and they dare one another to go. Once there, Romeo sees Juliet, she sees him, and they fall in love. They transgress the boundary set by the family's mutual hate for one another, and they get married in secret. The lads of both houses meet in a public square, leading to a contest of wit between Mercutio, who's a cousin of House Montague, and Tibble, a cousin of House Capulet. Romeo turns up at the point where it looks like violence and interferes. He's just got married. He turns up, tries to put a stop to the fighting. What he thinks is going to be a fight. In the confusion and by mistake, Tibble fatally stabs Mercutio and he's taken off stage dying. Romeo kills Tibble in revenge and is then banished by the Duke. He consummates the secret marriage with Juliet before he leaves. Juliet is then ordered by her father, Lord Capolet, to marry a young nobleman he's found for her called Count Paris. This marriage has been impending through the play, but she's finally basically told what to do. Distraught, she seeks advice from the Friar who performed the secret marriage ceremony. He gives her a drug that will make it look as though she's died. The intention is to buy some time. Now, the Friar is intending to let Romeo know about this, but it doesn't work out. Romeo, in the meantime, in exile, has bought some poison and rides back to Verona because he's heard that Juliet's dead. He intends to kill himself at her graveside. There, he meets poor old Paris and kills him. I feel quite sorry for Paris, actually. And then finishes himself off when he sees what he thinks is Juliet's corpse in the Capolet family mausoleum. She wakes up, sees his dead body and stabs herself with a dagger. Everybody else arrives and the truth comes out. Now the reason for going through this at some speed, but the reason for going through it at all, is because you have to know what's going on between these families and between these various characters so that you have a context for the development of the 2 main characters. The characters function within the plot line. That's extremely important. This play is built upon a series of relationships. It's not about an individual. So there are 4 main groups of characters. Now what we'll do is take a broad overview of each group and then discuss them looking at some textual details. The first group, obviously, is Romeo and Juliet, the protagonists, the main characters, a pairing. Romeo is from the Montague family, Juliet from the Capulet family. The opposition to them, the antagonists, are from Juliet's household, they're from her family. Tibble, her cousin, and Lord Capulet, her father. The third group is supporting cast, enablers if you like. From the Montague household, it's Mercutio, Romeo's cousin, and to some extent Benvolio, another cousin. From the Capulet household, it's Juliet's nurse. And the third main element of the supporting cast is the Friar, who performs a secret marriage and provides the drugs and so on. He's independent of both households. He's socially independent because he's from the church. Finally, you have a group of very minor characters, or relatively minor characters. The Capolet household, you have Lady Capulet, Juliet's mum, you have poor old Count Paris. For the Montague household, for example, you have Romeo's parents, and you also have Prince Aeschylus, who's a bit of a cipher because he can't really keep control of events in his own city. So, we've looked at the plot, we've given you a broad overview of the four groups of characters. Now what we'll do is we'll run through the characters themselves, and we'll start with Romeo as the protagonist, Romeo as the main character. So there's a list of stuff that you'll see. He starts off as a bit of a pathetic lover. He thinks he should be in love because he's a young man and that's kind of what he thinks he should do. So he has this girlfriend called Rosalind who doesn't actually have much time for him. A lot of the time he's mixing it up with his mates. They almost dare one another to go to the feast at the Capulet house. There, however, he sees Juliet and this time genuinely falls in love, which she reciprocates, leading to a secret marriage. He, at this point, seems to become much more successful as a young man because he starts winning, for example, the competition of wits with Mercutio. He's wittier, he's better, he's more active. He's reached adulthood, effectively. However, he then kills Tibble, who's a cousin from the rival Capulet family, spends the night with Juliet before leaving for exile, and he becomes very desperate in exile, especially when he finds out that she's dead, supposedly. He almost becomes a tragic revenge protagonist. He kills Paris in the graveside, and then he kills himself. Juliet, the other main character, or protagonist, again you see a list of layers or levels to her character. She starts off as a supposedly or ostensibly or apparently dutiful girl staying within the household. Now, her main personal relationship is with her nurse, definitely not with a mother or a group of friends. She doesn't have a peer group. She's a woman. She's not supposed to leave the house except under certain circumstances, which she manipulates. This is part of the gender difference between Romeo on the one hand and Juliet on the other. Now, when she meets Romeo at the feast, she falls in love with him, but she's well aware of the danger. They have their secret marriage. She spends the night with Romeo before he goes to exile. She has the forced marriage with Paris. In order to avoid that, she gets the drug from the Friar. And then at the end of the play, she kills herself when she sees Romeo lying there dead. There's a lot of development with Juliet. Now what we'll do is we'll look at the opposition, the antagonists from Juliet's family, the Capulets. Now the two households are balanced. Tibble's main Montague counterpart from Romeo's house is Mercutio, Romeo's cousin. Tibble is a cousin of Juliet's Capulet family, and he kind of acts as the leader of the young Capulet men. It's almost like gang warfare. He's extremely competitive and very aggressive. He even wants to attack Romeo when the young Montague is recognised at the Capulet feast, but Lord Capulet stops him. Tibble leaves the ball rather than risk his own temper bringing about a confrontation. He doesn't trust himself. He's not sure that he can obey Lord Capulet, so he leaves. This all foreshadows the killing of Mercutio, the competitiveness with Mercutio. And that contest ends with the latter dying as Romeo steps between them, and he then kills Tibble. The second main antagonist, again from Juliet's family, is her dad, Lord Capulet. They have a long-standing feud with the Montagues, which is pretty much unexplained. It's just taken for granted. He's holding a feast at his house, which is where Romeo meets Juliet, and he stops Tibble attacking Romeo, citing guest customs and the fact that the prince has just forbidden them to keep fighting. Now, watch for his language. He swears all the time. He's very hot-headed. He uses religious vocabulary, which is sweary words in that period. Now, when Juliet refuses the marriage, this is a bit later, that he set up for her with Paris, he goes mental. He goes completely berserk. It's totally off the scale. There are all sorts of worries here about lineage, succession and inheritance, especially by a sole daughter. His language is the same style as before, but it's even more nasty. It's, I love this word, vituperative. If you put that in an essay, you might get some more points. It's a nice word. Now what we'll do is we'll look at the supporting cast. The Montagues, Romeo's family, has to be Mercutio. He's a bit of a major figure in his own right until he dies. He gets lots of funny, appropriately mercurial speeches. He's a major secondary character, if you like. He's the Montague family's equivalent to Tibble. He's a cousin who has an important role to play in the advancing action. And it's his death at the hands of Tibble and Romeo's interference that precipitates the tragedy. Another person who should be mentioned here is Benvolio. He's a relatively minor, kind of internal choral figure, almost like a commentator, similar to, say, I don't know, Horatio in Hamlet. He's another Montague relative, and he's the voice of reason or goodwill. That's actually what his name means, Benvolio, in Italian, goodwill. The supporting cast from the Capolet side is Juliet's nurse. With Romeo, it's his cousins, other young men. With Juliet, it's the nurse. This is the woman who brought her up as her nursemaid. In this period, the aristocratic women usually pass the children as soon as possible onto a wet nurse, probably a lower class woman who's lost her own child in childbirth or soon after. So she's the person who actually feeds the child and brings her up. Romeo gets his psychological support from his friends, from his mates, from his peer group. Juliet gets hers from the nurse. It's a very personal relationship, unlike that with her mother. She is a narrative patterning element with Mercutio. Now, the nurse is Juliet's ear on the outside world. She's practical to the point of coarseness. She even advises Juliet to commit bigamy at one point, to be married twice to different men. The other main element of the supporting cast is the Friar. He has a crucial social role. He doesn't belong either to one of the families or to the state. He's a churchman. He tries to help by setting up the secret marriage. Now, this may be somewhat morally dubious, but he's trying to do it for a greater social or ethical good. He's trying to broker peace between the two families. And it goes wrong, although a lot of this is by chance. He's well educated, he has access to knowledge, slightly dodgy knowledge in the form of plants and drugs and so on. Basically, he's a walking piece of well-intentioned interference, and it goes wrong. Minor characters. From the Capulet side, we have her mother, Lady Capulet, and Paris. Lady Capulet actually kind of has to be reminded by the nurse exactly how old Juliet is. She says, I think she's kind of nearly 14, is that right? And the nurse says, oh yeah, she's not quite 14 yet. They don't use that language, but that's the implication. There are no hints of any other children. There are obviously anxieties of succession and inheritance here because the only child of the family is a young daughter. These associations matter in this period. Remember the career of Henry VIII, remember Elizabeth and all the problems of the Tudors and inheritance. It's also unclear exactly how she relates to her husband. Is she a lot younger than him? Do they actually spend any time together anymore? Is she still of childbearing age? Can she bear children? All of these things are in the background here. Poor old Paris is a bit of a cipher. Nice young nobleman perhaps. Unfortunately for him, he's in the wrong place at the wrong time and gets killed by Romeo. The equivalents in the Montague household are almost non-existent. They're Romeo's parents, and they only appear something like 3 times in the play. Romeo spends most of his time out of the house, so his household, his family, doesn't need to be elaborated to the same extent as Juliet's. Juliet spends her time in the house or trying to escape it, so her social network of family and nurse matters. With the state, minor character is Prince Aeschylus, who's a bit useless because he can't keep the peace in his own town. There's also a chorus figure who functions to tell the audience what's going on. Now, I'm not going to spend any time on that because it's not really a character, but he will, or she will, depending who plays it, turn up when we look at the plot. So now what we'll do is suggest some study tips. What do you do with these characters if you have to study the play and if you have to write essays or exams on it? So we'll start with Romeo. We'll do 3 things. First of all, we'll look at him as independent. Remember, he's always running around the place. Nobody knows where he is half the time. When he sees Juliet for the first time, this is what he says. And this is standard exam fodder. This is a strand of imagery that goes all the way through the play. He says, you see this on the screen, "Oh, she doth teach the torches to burn bright. It seems she hangs upon the cheek of night, like a rich jewel in an Ethiop's ear." So you could argue there's a wee bit of racism there, but certainly it's standard discourses of colour, light and dark, shadows, shades, beauty too rich for use, for earth too dear. So she's extreme. She's the best he's ever seen, and she's shining in the dark. So shows a snowy dove trooping with crows. And then he finishes off by saying, "Did my heart love till now, forswear its sight, for I ne'er saw true beauty till this night." Now, there's a hint of an undertone of a problem here, because in this period, beauty is always bright. Beauty is always white. And he's seeing this beauty in the darkness. So there's an undercurrent that is tragic. There are associations of shades and shadows, and obviously that's what's going to happen. Part 2 is when Romeo becomes a lover. And I've got on the screen here just the very, very beginning of the balcony scene. This is actually before he sees Juliet on the balcony. He's hiding from Benvolio and Mercutio, and he says to the audience, this is him talking about Mercutio, he jests at scars that never felt a wound. Juliet appears above at a window, and he says, and these are very famous lines, "But soft, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. Arise, fair sun, and kill the envious moon." So there's that light dark thing again, sun, moon. She's in the east, she's the dawn, so she's kind of dispersing the shadows, but there's still a hint that there are shadows there. That's what he says when he first sees her. Look for that strand of imagery, that kind of vocabulary. And then towards the end of the play, this is Romeo part 3 if you like. Romeo is a bit of a desperado. He becomes almost a kind of revenge figure. The only thing that he has in mind is to break into Juliet's tomb and kill himself. That's what he wants to do. And he goes to an apothecary that he's noticed while he's in exile in Mantua, and he gives the guy gold and he buys poison from him. "There is thy gold, worse poison to men's souls," he says. And then at the end, he speaks to the poison, right? He says, "Come, cordial and not poison, go with me to Juliet's grave, for there must I use thee." Right? So he's intending to kill himself. What we'll do now is look at Juliet, and she speaks a mutual sonnet with Romeo. This is Juliet falling in love. She speaks a form of poetry that's associated with love discourse in this period. And I'm not going to go through this, it's on the screen, you can see it, but watch for the strand of imagery again, and in this case it's religious. Words like shrine, pilgrims, devotion, palmers, saints, faith, prayer. So they're speaking an interlaced poem together, and it signifies mutual love. That's a really useful moment with Juliet. It's a useful moment with both of them, actually. Juliet then, this is Juliet part 2 of 3, defies convention. And this is the balcony scene, almost exactly after the section we were talking about previously with Romeo, soft, what light is in that balcony and so on. And she says, "O Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo?" Very famous line, "Deny thy father and refuse thy name." Now this is a moment where our language has changed. She's not saying, "Where are you?" She's saying, "Why are you?" Wherefore means why in this period. Why did I have to fall in love with Romeo? Why did it turn out to be you? Because she knows that his family and her family hate each other's guts. And she continues, "'Tis but thy name that is my enemy." She sees a difference between lineage and family on the one hand and who you are on the other. Now you could argue this is the emergence of some kind of modern selfhood. She's more attracted to the individual than the family lineage. And she says, just to finish this little section off, "What's in a name?" This is very famous as well. "That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet." So she wants to go for what's inherent to the person, not the social trappings. Of course, that is going to create a social conflict because they're in a situation, as we've seen, where There's a social context, a social situation set up which is going to destroy them. Part 3, Juliet 3 of 3, is when she rebels. And her mother comes to her and says, marry my child, early next Thursday morning, you're going to get married. And she says, he shall not make me there a joyful bride. I wonder at this haste that I must wed ere he that should be husband comes to woo. She's quite vicious when she gets going as Juliet. She knows her own mind. And she's right. The guy hasn't even come to talk to her properly yet. Right? And she's been told, oh, by the way, you're going to marry this guy next Thursday. This is dynastic marriage alliance. This is aristocracy at its worst, or finest, depending on how you want to put it. And he says to her mother, I pray you tell my lord and father, madam, I will not marry yet. And when I do, I swear, it shall be Romeo, whom you know I hate. So there's all sorts of dramatic irony there. We already know that she's married to Romeo. Lady Capulet says, oops, here comes your dad. We'll pick up on this in a few minutes. Before we do that, slight study tip on Tibble as antagonist. Pick up on how vicious he is and how violent and how fiery he is. He's called Fiery Tibble for a reason. When he sees Romeo at the feast, he's about to go mental. He actually turns to one of the servants and says, fetch me my rapier, boy. Get my sword so I can kill him. What dares the slave come hither, covered with an antic face, he's probably got a mask on, to fleer and scorn at our solemnity? Now by the stock and honour of my kin, to strike him dead I hold it not a sin. Right? Now, you've got a bit of a rhyme there, but also he's swearing by family honour. That's much more important to this guy. Juliet sees people as individuals. Tibble sees people as how they relate to the family. In that way, he's a typical aristocrat. Now, Lord Capolet at this point stops him. I've mentioned this before. He says, why, how now, kinsman, wherefore storm you so? No, you're not going to do this, guy, because he's under my house. Not going to happen. This doesn't stop him going a bit mental himself later. So we're talking about Lord Capulet as antagonist. And this is the speech you want. Again, you see it on the screen. I'm not going to go through it in detail, but we'll pick out some elements. He swears. He swears all the time. He swears a lot. God's bread, it makes me mad. He's swearing on the sacrament. He's swearing on the mass. That's pretty serious for an Italian Catholic. It says, still my care hath been to have her matched. Still in this period means always. Right? He's saying, I've been trying all the time to make sure she, my daughter Juliet, makes a good marriage alliance. And he's provided a gentleman of noble parentage, of fair demesnes, youthful and nobly trained. He's basically saying, I've arranged a marriage for her and she's not up for it. That's not acceptable. I'm her dad, she does what I want. Remember, in this period, technically, she's owned by her father. Women are property, and that matters for aristocratic women, and it matters for heiresses. He actually says to her, this is further down the speech, graze where you will, you shall not house with me. Right? He's spitting the words out. He's absolutely incandescent with rage, and there's a monosyllables. He's basically calling her a cow, saying, a piece of livestock. I'm going to throw you out, and you can go and eat whatever you want. Graze where you will. An you be mine, I'll give you to my friend. He owns her. Since you belong to me, since you are mine, I'm going to give you to my friend. That's what he's saying. And you be not, hang, beg, starve, die in the streets, for by my soul, he's swearing again, I'll ne'er acknowledge thee. He's basically saying to her, you don't do what I want, you're out. I'm disowning you. This is nasty. Right? This guy is not someone you want to mess with. So what we'll do now is we'll look at some of the more secondary characters, if you like. Mercutio is a supporting character. I'm not going to do the usual thing, which is to look at his Queen Mab speech before they go to the feast at the Capolet family. But what I will do is look at the little conversation between him, short conversation between him and Romeo, just as Romeo interrupts. Romeo says, peace, Mercutio, peace, thou talk'st of nothing. True, I talk of dreams, which are the children of an idle brain, begot of nothing but vain fantasy. It's basically saying, yeah, you're right, I talk too much. That kind of interaction between the two of them is very, very important. But look out for Mercutio's role and the kind of vocabulary he uses. Similarly with the nurse as supporting character, she's the mirror to Mercutio for Romeo it's the nurse for Juliet. And as I said earlier, the nurse is the person who brought Juliet up. She nursed her as a baby and then brought her up as a child. And this is what she says when basically Juliet's been told by her dad she's going to marry this guy. Juliet's freaking out. She's already married. She married Romeo. And she says to the nurse, what am I going to do? You know, we're on our own. Please, I need advice. And this is what the nurse says. Then, since the case so stands as now it doth, I think it best you married with the county. Commit bigamy. That's what she says to her. She's practical to the point of blasphemy, actually, if you think about it. I think you are happy in this second match, for it excels your first. Or if it did not, your first is dead. Or 'twere as good he were, as living here, and you no use of him, is what she says. Basically, he's gone. He's pretty much dead, or he might as well be, because he's in exile. He's no good to you. What are you going to do? Marry the other guy anyway. Keep your dad happy. It's quite startling, actually, what she suggests. Watch for her language, it's quite coarse. The other person, a supporting character, is the Friar. Now, you will need to mention the Friar if you're answering on this in an exam or an essay. Draw attention to his role as go-between. He's the person who interferes and tries to get things right. And Juliet comes to him and says, what am I going to do? You know, you've married me to Romeo, and my dad is ordering me to marry this other guy, and I don't know how I can get out of this. And he says, I've got a drug, that'll help. He says, hold, daughter, I do spy a kind of hope. Watch his language here, which craves as desperate an execution. There's a pun there. It means carrying something out, executing something, but it also has implications of being executed, having your head chopped off. He says, if rather than to marry County Paris thou hast the strength of will to slay thyself, then it is likely thou wilt undertake a thing like death to chide away this shame. If thou darest, I'll give thee remedy. So he has a drug that if she takes it will make it look as if she's dead. That'll buy them some time. Watch for the Friar's role. It really, really matters. Now, I could spend a bit of time on the two households and the minor characters. I'll just mention them, but they are pretty basic, pretty minor. They're there, but they don't really influence the action. And what I'm thinking here is people like Lady Capulet, or Paris, or Romeo's parents. They're pretty much ciphers. They're there in the background, but they don't actually do very much. So we've looked at the plot. We've looked at various groups of characters. We've looked at the kind of language they use. And there are some key words here that you need to know about. First of all, protagonist, that's a main character. In this play, there's more than one. Antagonist is the main opposition, anti, okay, antagonist. The ensemble is the group of actors, the rest of the cast, divided in this play particularly into more important supporting characters and others. Remember the importance of gender in this play. The difference between Romeo and Juliet is split along gender lines. Romeo is always out of the household. Juliet is never out of the household, except when she's using the Friar as an excuse. That's her escape. She's effectively family property. And I've also given you here on the screen the link to the MIT online text, which is quite useful because it's on the internet. So to finish off, I'd just like to say good luck with your studies, if you're studying the play for exam purposes or whatever. And if you want to know more, there are also videos on plot and context for Romeo and Juliet, so please remember to subscribe.